back to Bookmark Chronicles. So today I decided to do a mid-year wrap-up. I thought about doing the mid-year book freakout tag, but I feel like we're a little too far into July to do that. So I'm just gonna do this, and maybe moving forward I'll end up doing quarterly wrap-ups. I don't read enough to do a monthly wrap-up in my opinion, so every few months we'll see what happens. The first book that I read this year was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. This was recommended to my friend Carla. Carla is my person. She is the Meredith to my Christina. So when she recommended it, I was a little skeptical, but I had to take her word for it because she would never lie to me. In this book, we follow a man named Theo, who is a criminal psychotherapist, and he is really determined to work with this woman named Alicia, who was a famous painter. Alicia was accused of murdering her husband, and since that night, she has not spoken a single word. So Theo throws all of his energy into working with her, trying to use different methods to get her to speak, to try to get her to paint again. And I was very pleasantly surprised by this book. For it to be the first book that I read of the year and to give it a 5-star read was huge for me. Great start to the reading year. I'm a sucker for a good plot twist, so I did not see any of the twists and turns coming, and I really love that. I also made my boyfriend read it and he liked it too, so highly recommend if you are interested in mystery and thriller, or if you want to get into it. This is probably a good place to start because it's not like super crazy. You're only following a couple people, but when the dots are connected, I was very pleasantly surprised, so I really recommend this one. The next book that I read was Big Little Lies by Lane Moriarty. I really like this one. It's also a mystery thriller, but there's also a lot of drama incorporated into it, and I think that's why it kept my attention. So from the beginning, you know that someone has been murdered, but you don't know who or who did it. And you're following these different parents. It's basically about all of these parents who have students that attend this school. Most of them are the same grade, so it's how their children interact, how they interact with each other, and then there's drama with ex-husbands, second wives, and then working moms versus stay-at-home moms, kind of like unnecessary drama, but like enough to keep it going. So you're following these different people, and eventually you start to connect the dots and you start to figure out who was murdered, then you find out by whom and why. I really liked it. I also watched the HBO series, so whether you're interested in reading the book or watching the series, I recommend either one. I gave this a 4 out of 5. The next book that I read this year was The Wife Between Us by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. This one was interesting. At first, it seems like you're following the story of an ex-wife who is jealous and bitter that her former husband is getting remarried to a younger, prettier version of her. And as you read, you find out that there are a lot of things that you don't know, and slowly the pieces start to connect and you're kind of in dual perspectives. It was a really interesting read. It was a little predictable, but I still enjoyed it. I gave this one a 4 as well, so highly recommend. I do want to read more by this pair. One of my colleagues read The Anonymous Girl, I think, and I believe I also have one of their books on Kindle Unlimited, so hopefully I can get to those soon. I did like this one though. The next book that I read was Top Secret by Serena Bowen and Elle Kennedy. This one is about, we're following a guy who's in college. He's been with his girlfriend for a certain amount of time, and for her birthday she asked for a threesome. So he gets onto this app and tries to find them a third, and things get weird from there. I don't read a lot of male-male romance, not because I don't want to, but because I just don't really know where to start. But I saw, I think my friend Laura was reading this and I saw it on Goodreads. So I listened to it on audio and I really enjoyed it. Things are a bit steamy, there's some tension between the characters, and a lot of drama unfolded, which I enjoyed. I like drama in my books, not in real life though, so keep the drama in the pages. The next book that I read was The Afterlife of Holly Chase by Cynthia Hand. I thought that this was going to be a good one because it's a retelling of A Christmas Carol. We follow this girl named Holly. She's 17, spoiled, selfish, and rich, and basically she is our Scrooge in this story. She's visited by someone in her life who recently died, and they try to tell her that she needs to do better and be better. She ignores them and then she dies. But when she dies, she doesn't exactly cross over. Instead, she ends up working for this company called Project Scrooge. Their goal is basically to try to save their Scrooges and convince them to be better and do better so that they can live. I did not enjoy this. I gave it a 2 out of 5. I hated the main character. Holly's a bitch. And she is just so difficult for no reason. And I understand that she is a teenager, but being a teenager is not synonymous with being a pain in the ass. And she just goes out of her way to be a bitch to people, and it was unnecessary. I also hated the way it ended, so I did not recommend this one, but if you're interested, I did listen to it on audio and I really liked that part, but the story itself was not my favorite. Side note, the reason that I don't have physical copies of most of these is because I listen to them on audio. The only one that I do have a copy of is The Wife Between Us, but I gave that to a friend to borrow before coronavirus and I haven't seen them since then, so. The next books that I read are part of a series. I read The Illuminate Files by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This series consists of 3 books: Illuminate, Gemina, and Obsidio. I was hesitant to read this because I don't read a lot of sci-fi or anything that takes place in space, but I actually really liked it. So in this series, in book 1, we are following Katie and Ezra, who just broke up with each other, and they think that's the worst thing they're gonna have to deal with for the day, and then all of a sudden their planet is being invaded. People are dying, fires dropping from these spacecrafts. They do manage to escape, but while they're on this craft that evacuated them and is trying to get them to safety, a deadly plague breaks out. So a lot of things happening, which I like. I wasn't bored while I was reading it. I did have physical copies of all 3. I also got them in audio because there are a lot of details, and some of the files that we're reading, it's told in files, so it's like transcriptions of dialogue or reports. Some of them have things that are redacted or have strike-throughs, and it was kind of annoying, so I ended up getting them on audio. What I do like about the books, though, is that there are illustrations. So this is like Unipedia, which is like Wikipedia. There's also maps of the spacecrafts that they're on, things like that. And then there's like iMessaging between Katie and Ezra because they're both on different ships, but they're trying to get in touch with each other and make sure that they're okay. Yeah, I really liked it. It was very exciting. It's a big book, so listening to it on audio really helped me get through it. I gave each of the books in the series a 3 out of 5, and that's mainly because I liked them, but I felt like the endings were really unrealistic, especially Gemina, which is my favorite of the 3. Like, if you've read it, you know what I mean, but I like the way it ended before it actually ended, because at one point we think one thing happened and then something else happened, and I liked it better the first time around. But recommend if you like sci-fi fantasy, even just as this being my first sci-fi, I still really liked it and I do recommend it. The next book that I read is The Call by Pedaro Gilling, an Irish novelist. I listened to this one on audio. It wasn't good. Basically, The Call is when at any moment you could disappear and find yourself in this other world where you're going to be attacked by the creatures that inhabit that world. And these creatures like to torture humans in the worst possible way, turn them into strange animals, treat them as pets, all sorts of weird, crazy things. So all of these students that we follow are at this academy where they are trying to be taught how to survive the call, yet so many don't survive. Between the ableism and the misogyny in this book, the plot was sort of interesting, but I only gave it a 2. I did not enjoy it. There were just a lot of characters who were either just like despicable and unnecessarily evil, or characters who are just really fucking dumb. And there is a slight romance in it, which feels totally out of place, honestly. I do not recommend. The next book that I read is Cracked Up to Be by Courtney Summers. I got this because I read Sadie, and I really, really, really love that. If you have not read Sadie, highly recommend. I gave it 5 stars. The reason that I picked this up is because the cover of this is similar to that of Sadie. What I didn't know at the time is that this is not the original cover. They changed it so that it looks more like the cover of Sadie, and they're not at all similar, and this one was nowhere near as good. In this book, we follow Parker, who is a high school student who is struggling with a lot of things. Her best friend is missing, and she just has a lot of things going on. Trigger warnings for alcoholism, depression, sexual assault. What I didn't like about this is that I didn't really like Parker, and I understand that she is going through a lot of things, and I can sympathize with that 100%, but she really went out of her way to just be really nasty to people for no reason. Well, she thought she had a reason, but from the outside looking in, it didn't really seem like a good reason. I also just didn't agree with some of the decisions that she made. I ended up giving this a 2 out of 5. I don't want to discourage anybody from reading it. I just didn't like it, but I also think I was comparing it to Sadie, which I really, really loved, and they're not really at all related. The next book that I read is If You Tell by Greg Olson. The subtitle is a true story of murder, family secrets, and an unbreakable bond of sisterhood. So I got this one on Kindle Unlimited. I listened to it on audio, and I got it because I really like true crime, which is probably weird, but whatever. So I was interested to see about it. After I read it, I looked up the actual story to see what happened. But it's about these 3 sisters who have a vile mother. She inflicts strange forms of torture on them and people that are close to her, people who think that she is their friend, and she basically strips them of their identities and reduces them to nothing. It was odd and cringy and creepy. It's a true story, and it actually happened, and it's amazing that she went on doing these things for so long. I gave this a 3 out of 5. If you like true crime, I suggest it, but there are some, not necessarily gory, but some scenes that might make you want to vomit, so beware of that. What's next? The next book that I read is Four Dead Queens by Astrid Schulte. I really like this. I had heard a lot about it, and I was really excited to get to it. In this book, we follow a 17-year-old girl named Carolee who is trying to solve the murder of the queens of Quadera. So Quadera is basically a country made of 4 different regions, and so for each region, there is one queen. The queens start dying one by one, and Carolee's trying to get to the bottom of it. I enjoyed this. I gave it a 4 out of 5. First and foremost, the cover is very pretty. I really enjoyed the story. I liked learning about the queens and their different regions, and the different regions of Quadera kind of remind me of the factions of Divergent. I hated that series, but that's another time. Where one is focused on agriculture and this one is super techy and really advanced and things like that. We also learn more about the relationship of the queens and whether they get along with each other, and we learn a little bit of backstory about each of them as we get to the point where they are about to die. It is told from multiple perspectives, so we have Carolee who's trying to solve the murders of the queens, and we also get to see a little bit from the queens themselves. Highly recommend if you like fantasy, if you like queendoms, and murder. The next book that I read is One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. I enjoyed this. It's very Pretty Little Liars / Gossip Girlish, so if you like those, this is probably for you. So in this book we follow multiple characters, I believe 5 of them. So it's Bronwyn the Brain, Addie the Beauty, Nate the Criminal, Cooper the Athlete, and Simon the Outcast. All of these people end up in detention together, and then one of them dies. It was really interesting to see how it ended, who was responsible, all of that. I did enjoy it. I believe I gave it a 4 out of 5. I love multiple perspectives, so I was immediately drawn in through that. I also really liked getting to know all of these characters. I think in high school you have preconceived notions of people based on what you've heard, but then when you actually get to know them, it can be totally different. So I really like that. I really like the relationship between all of them. I did not see the ending coming. I thought about it, but cast it out for a number of reasons, and then found out that that was actually right and was very pleasantly surprised. So yeah, I did like this one. Next, I read the sequel to One of Us is Lying, One of Us is Next. I did enjoy this. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I thought it was okay, but not great, partially because I didn't like the fact that it was basically One of Us is Lying, but with different characters. The reason that I did end up giving it a 3 instead of a 2 is because I did not see the ending coming, and like I said, I am a sucker for a good plot twist. If you read the first one, this book does follow characters that were introduced in the first book, but that main five has graduated, so these are the new seniors at Bayview. If you like the first one, you'll probably also like this one. Like I said, I was completely blindsided by the ending, so I do recommend. The next book that I read is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I read this because my friend Erica recommended it, and then the TV show was coming out, and I always want to read the book before I watch the TV show or the movie. So in this book, we follow Mia, who is a single mother. She and her daughter Pearl move to this new town, and she meets this woman named Elena, who also has children that go to the same school as Pearl. So there's the connection between Pearl and these other children, as well as between Mia and Elena. There's a little bit of tension there. There's also a major plot line with some other characters, but I don't want to say anything if you haven't read it or watched the show yet. I did like it. I definitely liked the book more than the TV show. The TV show is on Hulu, and while I do think that it was good, I felt like they really upped the racism, and I guess they did it for drama, but they do all these things and then there's no consequence, really. I feel like it was kind of just thrown in there and there was no teaching moment from it. I also didn't like that Pearl is 10 times a bigger bitch in the TV show. She's completely different from the way she is in the book. And a lot of things that she did and said to Mia, I don't think would fly in real life. So even though it wasn't my favorite, I do still recommend it if you're interested in watching the show. Plus, Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington are both phenomenal, so recommend. The next book that I read is The Husband's Secret by Lane Moriarty. I wanted to like this one, but it was not as good as Big Little Lies. To be honest, it was a little dry, a little boring. I did still give it a 3 because I did enjoy it. I like the different perspectives. We follow 3 different women. One of the main characters that we follow is Cecilia, and while she's in the attic one day, she finds a letter addressed to her from her husband, and it says, "If you're reading this, then I'm dead." The problem is her husband is very much alive, so she has to figure out whether or not she wants to read this letter, what it could possibly contain, and she ends up having a phone call with her husband, and he asks her not to read it. So the reason that I found this one a little boring is because from the synopsis in the very first chapter, we know that Cecilia has found this letter. It takes forever for her to open it. So there's all these other things going by that kind of don't matter, and you're just kind of like, okay, but where's the letter? What about the letter? When are you going to open that letter? Again, the reason that I gave this a 3 instead of a 2 is because there were some things that I did not see coming. It just took a long time to get there. But if you like mystery and thriller, or if you like Lane Moriarty, this one is probably a good one for you. The next book that I read is The Missing Sister by Elle Mar. In this, we follow Angela, who lives in the States. Her parents recently died in a car accident, and her twin sister lives in Paris. They haven't spoken to each other in a while, but then Angela gets an email that says she needs to come to Paris right away because her sister is missing. I didn't like this. I didn't like it at all. It has Taken vibes. If you've seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, the way these stories go down just makes me feel like I never want to go to Paris. I didn't really like Angela too much. I felt like sometimes she blatantly ignored clues that she needed to follow. But aside from characters, the plot was interesting. It just took forever for us to get where we were going. And then there's like all this historical stuff that's thrown in and kind of fits with the plot, but also it just felt like filler. There are also some scenes that are thrown in and like add no value to the plot because you're like, okay, wait, why did that just happen? Is this gonna come up later? And then you get to the end and you're like, so that scene was literally for nothing. I just didn't like it. I also didn't like some of the dialogue was really weird. Yeah, I didn't like the writing style, and honestly, I was bored through a lot of it. But yeah, it wasn't for me. Maybe if you're into Parisian history and architecture, you might like it, but I'm not, so it didn't work for me. Next, I read the Red Queen series by Victoria Aveyard. This consists of 4 books: Red Queen, Glass Sword, King's Cage, and War Storm. I also got Broken Throne, which is a collection of novellas and other short stories. So in Red Queen, we follow Mare Barrow, who is known as what is referred to as a red in this world, where you either have red blood or silver blood. The silvers are basically the royalty and may have these special abilities where they can manipulate certain objects. So some can control water, others can control metal. We find out that our main character also has these special abilities. Hers is to control lightning, but it doesn't make sense because her blood is red. Because the Silver King and Queen don't want anyone to know that a red girl has these abilities, they bring her into the royal court, make up this identity for her, and pretend that she is a long lost silver princess. I really enjoyed this series. I was very intrigued by the world, the silver and red divide, as well as the abilities. A lot of the abilities reminded me of those that take place in the Grishaverse, and I love those books, so that's kind of what pulled me into this one. I gave Red Queen and Book 3, King's Cage, 4s out of 5, and I gave Glass Sword and War Storm both 3 out of 5. While I enjoyed the main 4 books of the series, I didn't really enjoy Broken Throne. I didn't read all of it. It contains novellas and short stories about some of the characters that we see in the other books, but there's no reason for this to be this long. For the little bit of information that we're getting about the characters, I felt like it was really dragged out and I just wasn't into it. So on Goodreads, I only marked certain ones as read. I only ended up reading maybe 4 of the stories in here because it's just excessively long and you're not getting enough information for all the pages that there are. The next book that I read was More Myself by Alicia Keys. It's a memoir. I listened to it on audio, and if you're going to read it, I do recommend the audio. She has a lot of cool introductions and little musical pieces that you hear. I read it because I realized that I don't know much about Alicia Keys. I think her first 3 albums were amazing. I really like those. I don't really listen much to her newer music, but in general, I don't tend to follow like celebrity gossip or anything like that. But when I saw that she was releasing the book, I was interested, and so I immediately got it on audio. And I am going to do a video on book recommendations. That first part of recommendations will be biographies and memoirs, which I do recommend you listen to on audio because you get to hear the author tell their own story. So I gave this one a 4 out of 5. If you like Alicia Keys, if you like her music, I do recommend it. It's just interesting to learn about people that you see on TV and may not know anything about. The last few books in my wrap-up are those of the Hunger Games trilogy. Most people already know, but that series consists of The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay. I'm actually not quite done with Mockingjay yet. I'm almost done. I've got just that little bit to go, and then I can read A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. If you follow me on social media, you know that I'm loving this reread. I decided to reread it before I read the prequel because I wanted all of the information to be fresh in my mind. I love the characters in this book. I think the world is interesting. I don't really read dystopian, but this one is amazing. I gave Hunger Games 4 out of 5. I gave Catching Fire a 4, and I think Mockingjay will probably also be a 4. Out of the trilogy though, I think this one is my favorite. The introduction to the world is just really good. I love the pacing. I'm never bored when I'm reading it. If you don't already know, this follows Katniss Everdeen, who lives in a country known as Panem. And every year the capital forces each of the 12 districts to send 2 tributes to participate in that year's Hunger Games. Literally, it's a fight to the death with children, and only one person can survive. That is the only way that the games end. So Katniss's younger sister gets chosen as one of the tributes, and she volunteers to take her place. Love this book, love the characters, and so excited to finish reading Mockingjay, and I hope that I get to A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes later today. So as you've seen, I'm really close to finishing Mockingjay. I may or may not film that review today as well. That's my goal, but we'll see. So let me know what you thought about this video. Let me know what you thought about any of the books that I mentioned, if you read them, if you like them, if you dislike them. And like I said, I will try to start doing quarterly wrap-ups depending on how much I can actually get through. With coronavirus and everything, we're supposed to be going back into the office in a couple of weeks, so we'll see how that goes. That's all I have for you today. I'll see you in the next video.